Well, President Trump's sweeping immigration crackdown is facing a stunning rebuke in the courts, where judges have ruled against immigration and customs enforcement detentions in roughly 90% of more than 10,000 cases. Politico has been tracking the rulings and has released a new database documenting the court's lopsided results, ICE's tactics for defying judges' orders, and the rising tensions between the courts and the White House. Joining us now with more, senior legal affairs reporter for Politico, Kyle Cheney. Kyle, let's walk through these findings. I mean, beyond the overwhelming losses in court, it's judges across the ideological spectrum. These aren't just liberal judges.
Exactly. And that's really what struck us early on when we started noticing, even before it was tens of thousands of cases, it started as a trickle, and before it really exploded and overwhelmed the court system everywhere. But we noticed that the rulings and the rejections of the assertion of detention power were coming from every quarter of the judiciary.
What's happening? Friends, John here. So this is what just happened, guys. Federal courts have dismantled Trump's unlawful mandatory immigration detention practice an estimated 15,000 times, a staggering figure that undermines the narrative of Trump's invincibility. Yet this story has barely been covered as the media continues to push the comfortable but false narrative that he always wins. Here's what's actually happening while you're doom scrolling. In courtrooms all over this country, in red states and blue states, in front of judges appointed by Republicans and judges appointed by Democrats, Trump's administration is getting absolutely dismantled. And I don't mean losing a squeaker here and there. I mean getting run out of the building. The New York Times built a litigation tracker on this, and they counted more than 600 lawsuits,
including many judges that Trump appointed. I think in a separate tracker, we have about 430 district court judges have rejected this assertion of power, compared to only about 40 or 50 who have supported it. And that includes a majority of Trump-appointed judges who have weighed in on it. So it is really a uniform, overwhelming rebuke.
And something that people might have missed, that last year they really changed the rules. There was a major expansion of mandatory detention, which you point out. The legal fight stems from a 2025 ICE memo that dramatically broadened who could be treated as seeking admission to the U.S. Explain why this matters.
Sure. This really is sort of the focal point of everything. It's essentially the way immigration policy used to work for the last 30 years was people who were who were apprehended at the border, essentially, were held in mandatory detention. What the Trump administration did uniquely that no administration before had ever asserted the power to do is say,
filed against his policies in a single year, 600. And in one slice of that data, final decisions on the merits, meaning the judge looked at the actual law and made an actual ruling. Plaintiffs won 48 times. The administration won 5. 5. That's not a close game. That's not even a game. That's a team getting mercy ruled and then trying to tell you they won on style points. And it gets worse for them. There's a separate breakdown floating around that pushes the numbers even further. Since Trump returned to the presidency, his administration has been sued over 750 times. 750 times. Courts have partially halted his policies in more than 150 of those cases. And on final merits decisions, plaintiffs have won 62, while the administration has won 7.
If you're apprehended anywhere in the country, no matter how long you've been here, whether you have a criminal record or not, in most cases they do not, you are treated as though you basically have arrived at the border and therefore are subject to mandatory detention. So that's millions of people who were not, and that's without a bond hearing, without even a chance to prove that you can be safely released to the community. So again, millions of people now subject to this that weren't prior to that memo.
Kyle, good morning. Great reporting here. So great that I'm sure you'll hear about it on Truth Social later today once the president sees this segment. I'm curious, though, what you think about how far up these questions may go. Appeals courts, I guess, have been a little divided on it. Might this question of what you just laid out rise all the way to the Supreme Court? Because remember, the promise in the campaign and in the early days of these operations was we're going after the worst of the worst. We're going to kick in doors, get the murderers and the rapists, get them out of the country, to which 90% of Americans said, yes, please do. But that obviously is not what this policy has brought.
That's right. And what's actually so remarkable about this is because of the proliferation of cases all over the country, we're also seeing this rise in every circuit.
7 out of 69. Do the math on that. That's about an average that would get you cut from a little league team. And Bloomberg ran their own analysis, looked at more than 325 cases, and found that Trump's executive actions have been stopped by courts over 200 separate times. They called it a stress test on presidential power. And I'll be blunt with you. The administration is flunking that test so badly, they should be repeating the grade. So how is that possible? How can a man be losing this catastrophically, this consistently, this publicly in the actual official written record of the United States court system, and you didn't know? How does that happen? That doesn't happen by accident.
Court in the country that now, in fact, every single federal appeals court circuit has now had arguments on this. 5 courts have weighed in, and probably more rulings coming imminently. Everyone involved in this, the Trump administration lawyers, the judges, everyone says this is a lock to go to the Supreme Court. I mean, nothing's ever truly a lock, but it would be sort of shocking if an issue that has divided the appeals courts this much, even though it's been overwhelming in the district courts in one direction, does not reach the Supreme Court and fairly soon.
And Kyle, another thing that your piece points out is the human impact is central to the court's frustration. The article highlighting emotionally charged cases involving nursing mothers, children, trafficking victims, DACA recipients, and parents of U.S. military members. Judges repeatedly emphasizing the harm done to families and communities. We really appreciate your work here. Please come back to talk about it more. Senior legal affairs reporter for Politico, Kyle Cheney, thank you.
That happens because losing is boring and winning is loud. A press conference is loud. A social media post at 3 a.m. is loud. A guy standing at a podium telling you he crushed it is loud. A federal judge in Boston quietly issuing a 40-page opinion that says, actually, you cannot detain human beings this way because it violates the law. That is not loud. That does not trend. Nobody makes a highlight reel out of a footnote. And so the loss just disappears. It evaporates. It goes into the record and stays there. And the guy who lost it walks outside and tells you he's winning. And you believe him because he said it with his chest out. That is the whole trick. That is the entire magic act. And today, we're pulling the curtain down. This is genuinely one of the biggest gaps between perception and reality in American politics right now. Because the perception is total dominance, untouchable, unstoppable. The courts are captured. The system is rigged. Nothing matters. Why even bother? And the reality is a guy who has been sued 750 times and is losing something like 3 out of every 4 federal cases challenging his executive actions. 3 out of 4. If your lawyer went 3 for 12, you fire your lawyer. You fire the whole firm, you burn the building down, and salt the earth. But when it's the federal government doing it with your tax dollars, it just becomes background noise. Now, I need to be careful here, and I'm going to be honest with you about the numbers because that matters to me. That 15,000 figure comes from a legal commentary segment describing a whole class of detention cases getting knocked down under the same unlawful practice, not 15,000 separate blockbuster trials with 15,000 separate judges. So when somebody in the comments tries to nitpick you on it, you'll be ready. But here's the thing that actually matters. Even if you throw that number out entirely, even if you delete it, pretend you never heard it, scrub it from your brain, the rest of the record still buries him. The Times tracker buries him. The Bloomberg analysis buries him. The 750 lawsuit count buries him. The 7 wins out of 69 buries him. Every independent count from every direction tells the exact same story. So over the next several minutes, we're doing 3 things. First, we're going to talk about what these detention cases actually are, because these aren't abstractions. These are real human beings getting locked up. And the reason judges keep ruling against the administration is not that judges hate Trump. It's that the law says you can't do that. Second, we're going to talk about why you never heard about any of this and why the losing is invisible problem is one of the most dangerous features of modern political media. And third, we're going to break down what it actually means going forward. Who's winning? Who's paying for it? And what happens if the one institution that's been holding the line finally gets tired? Because the version of this story you've been told is upside down. The reality is so different from the narrative that it's almost hard to believe they're talking about the same person. Let's talk about what a mandatory detention case actually is. And I want to do this carefully because this is the part where most coverage goes fuzzy. And the fuzziness is not an accident. Fuzziness is how you get away with things. Here's the plain English version. Immigration detention is when the government locks somebody up while their immigration case is being figured out. Not because they were convicted of anything, not because a jury said so, just detained. Sitting in a facility, sometimes for months, sometimes longer, while paperwork moves. And the law has rules about this. It has always had rules about this. There are categories of people who can be held without a bond hearing and categories who are entitled to one. Entitled meaning they get to stand in front of a judge and make the case that they should be released while they wait. And what the Trump administration did was take that narrow category, the one where you can hold somebody without giving them that hearing, and stretch it and stretch it and keep stretching it until it covered vastly more people than the law ever said it should. And that's the whole ballgame. That is the practice that is getting slaughtered in court over and over and over again, because judges look at it and say, hold on, this person is entitled to a hearing. You cannot just decide they aren't. That is not how any of this works. And this is the part that I really need you to hear, because it cuts against everything the outrage machine wants you to think. These judges are not activists. They are not a resistance cell in robes. A huge number of these rulings are coming from judges appointed by Republicans sitting in conservative districts and states that voted for the man. They are not ruling against him because they don't like him. They are ruling against him because the statute says what the statute says, and no amount of shouting at a podium changes the text on the page. Now, here's where I want to slow down, because I think most people fundamentally misunderstand what's going on. The common take is courts are stopping Trump. Therefore, the system is working. Everything's fine. Relax. And the other take is the courts are useless. He ignores them anyway. Nothing matters. Why bother? And both of those takes are wrong. Both of them. The truth is uglier and way more interesting than either one. And it's this: the system is working exactly as designed, and it is still losing. Because here's the dirty little secret about executive power. You can lose the case and still win the outcome. And that is the game being played right in front of you. Think about it. A policy gets announced. Immediately, it takes effect. People start getting detained. Families get separated. Lives get wrecked. Then the lawsuits get filed. That takes weeks. Then the hearings happen. That takes more weeks. Then the ruling comes down. And let's say the ruling is a total wipeout. The judge says, this is unlawful. Stop it right now. Great, fantastic. Except how long did that take? Months, sometimes longer. And during all those months, the policy was live. It was running. It was doing exactly what it was designed to do. And the people who got detained during that window, they don't get those months back. Nobody hands them a receipt. Nobody apologizes. There's no refund window on the time you spend in a detention facility because the government stretched the statute past its breaking point. So the administration loses in court and shrugs because the loss cost them a press cycle. They were never going to win anyway. And the win cost a real human being a year of their life. That's the exchange rate. And once you see it, you cannot unsee it. This is why the sheer volume matters so much. 750 lawsuits. Over 200 separate times, courts have stopped executive actions. That is not a bug in their strategy. I'd argue it's a feature. Flood the zone. Push everything at once. Some of it gets struck down, sure, but some of it doesn't. And the stuff that doesn't, that becomes the new normal. That's just how things are now. That's the water we're swimming in. And you cannot litigate everything. There aren't enough lawyers. There isn't enough money. There isn't enough time. The courts are a bottleneck. And the administration knows it. So they keep pushing, keep flooding, keep overwhelming the system until something breaks. Now let's talk about the media, because this is the part that really lights me up. Why didn't you hear about this genuinely? Why? A president losing 3 out of 4 federal cases challenging his own executive actions is objectively one of the biggest stories in the country. It's a story about whether the law means anything. It's a story about whether the words on the page have any force at all. And it should be everywhere, every night. And instead, silence. Or worse, a 15-second mention buried under a segment about somebody's social media posts. And the reason is not some grand conspiracy. It's dumber than that. It's more embarrassing than that. It's that court losses are structurally boring, and the entire media economy runs on things that are not boring. A ruling is a document. It's long. It's full of citations. It's written in a language that is deliberately, almost aggressively unexciting. There's no footage. There's no yelling. There's no confrontation. There's just a judge methodically over 40 pages explaining why the government's argument does not hold up. And that gets 0 clicks. Meanwhile, one inflammatory post gets 3 days of wall-to-wall panel discussion. So the outrage gets covered, the substance gets ignored, and the guy who is quietly getting demolished in courtrooms across the country gets to walk around with an aura of total invincibility that he did absolutely nothing to earn. He didn't build that image. You built it for him. We all did by paying attention to the noise and ignoring the record. And it's not just laziness either. There's an incentive problem underneath it. Conflict sells. And a story about a president losing steadily, procedurally, boringly in court after court is not a conflict story. It's a competent story. It's a story about a system grinding along and doing its job. That doesn't spike engagement. That doesn't make anybody angry enough to share it. So it dies. And the myth survives. And the myth is worth more than any single policy because the myth is what makes people give up. That's what it's for. When you believe the courts are rigged, you don't file the lawsuit. When you believe resistance is futile, you don't show up. When you believe he always wins, you stop checking whether he actually does. And that right there is the most valuable political asset in America right now. Not any policy. The belief that fighting back is pointless. And here's the twist that should genuinely make you angry, or at least make you sit up. That belief is empirically false. It's just wrong. It's not a matter of opinion. It is a factual claim about the world. And the world says otherwise. Real people with real lawyers, many of them working for free, walked into real courtrooms and beat the federal government of the United States 62 times on the merits against 7. Over 200 executive actions stopped cold, hundreds of injunctions. And these weren't billionaires. These weren't well-funded operations with unlimited resources. A lot of them were immigrants, detainees, people with nothing who were told they had no rights and no chance and who filed anyway. And they won over and over and over again. That is the most inspiring thing in American politics right now, and almost nobody is telling you about it. That's not an accident either. Now look, I want to keep myself honest here because I'm not interested in building you a comfortable little bubble where our side is perfect. So let me give you the other half. The courts do not always hold. The Supreme Court has on multiple occasions stepped in and bailed the administration out after it got hammered in the lower courts. That's real. That happens. And an injunction is not a permanent victory. It's a pause button. It can be appealed, it can be narrowed, it can be reversed. And a policy that gets struck down can come right back next month with a slightly different coat of paint on it, and start the whole process over. And nobody should pretend otherwise. Because if you promise people that the courts will save them and then the courts don't, you've just built a bigger, more painful version of the exact same despair you were trying to fight. But none of that, not one bit of it, changes the core fact. He is losing constantly, overwhelmingly on the record, in public, in documents you can go read yourself tonight for free. And the only reason you feel like he's winning is that somebody worked very hard to make sure you feel that way. So let's break down what it actually means. 4 points. Simple. Here we go. First point, the scoreboard is not close, and you need to internalize that. 600 lawsuits in a single year, according to the Times tracker. 750 since he came back to the presidency by a separate count. Over 200 executive actions stopped by courts, per Bloomberg's review of more than 325 cases. Plaintiffs winning 62 merits decisions against 7 for the administration. And roughly 75% of federal cases challenging his executive actions coming back as losses. That's the record. Not vibes, not spin, not what somebody yelled on the stage. The record. And every single one of those numbers comes from a different tracker, run by different people using different methods. And they all point the same direction. When 4 different scoreboards say the same thing, it's not bias. It's just the score. The detention cases are the heart of it, and they're the heart of it for a reason. This is where the administration pushed hardest and where they got hit hardest, because detention is where the rubber meets the road on executive power. It is quite literally the government's ability to put a human being in a box and keep them there. And if you can do that to people without giving them a hearing, if you can just decide unilaterally that a whole category of people doesn't get to see a judge, then there isn't much left that you can't do. That's why judges across the ideological spectrum keep drawing this line. Not because they're partisans, because this is the line. This is the one that if you erase it, you don't get to draw it again. And the administration ran at that line at full speed and got knocked flat thousands upon thousands of times. Who actually benefits from all this? And here's where it gets genuinely dark. The administration benefits from losing. I know how that sounds. Let me explain. Every one of these cases takes months. Every month, the policy is running. Every month, real people are detained. And when the ruling finally lands and the policy dies, the administration doesn't lose anything they can't afford. They lose a headline and they gain months of the policy actually operating in the real world. So the losses are the cost of doing business. And business is very good. The people who pay are the detainees, the families, the lawyers working late for nothing, the judges buried under a caseload nobody planned for, and you, because it's your money funding a Justice Department that keeps showing up to court to argue positions that keep getting thrown out. Your tax dollars paying government lawyers to lose over and over. That's the deal you're getting, and nobody asked you. And this is the one that actually matters going forward. Volume is the strategy. That's it. That's the whole thing. It is not an accident that this administration is generating lawsuits at a rate nobody has ever seen, because the courts are a bottleneck. They can only move so fast. There are only so many judges, so many hours, so many hearings. And if you push enough policy through the pipe at once, some of it makes it out the other side simply because the system couldn't get to it in time. It's not a legal strategy. It's a plumbing strategy. Overwhelm the drain. And the terrifying part is that it works, not on the merits. On the merits, it fails almost every single time. And we've spent all this time proving that. It works on the clock. And you cannot appeal the clock. So what happens next? 3 things to watch, and I want you watching all 3. Number 1, watch what the Supreme Court does with the appeals coming up from these detention rulings, because the lower courts have been holding the line beautifully. The question is whether the top of the pyramid holds it too. And that is genuinely, honestly, an open question. Number 2, watch whether the administration actually complies. because a court order is only as good as the enforcement behind it. And if the pattern shifts from losing and complying to losing and shrugging, that's not a legal story anymore. That's a completely different kind of story, and it's one this country has never really had to answer before. Number 3, watch the coverage. Watch whether any of this breaks into the mainstream now. Watch whether the 15,000 becomes a headline or whether it stays exactly where it's been, buried in a filing in a courthouse in a city nobody's cameras were pointed at. And let me leave you with this, because I think it's the actual point underneath all the numbers. Everything about the way this story has been told to you was designed to make you feel small, designed to make you feel like the fight was already over, like the outcome was decided somewhere above your pay grade, like the only reasonable thing to do was log off and let it happen. And that is a lie. It's a lie with a purpose. It's a lie that a lot of very powerful people need you to believe. And the receipts, the boring, unglamorous, 40-page opinion receipts, say the opposite. They say people fought and won thousands of times quietly, without applause, without a single camera in the room. He is not invincible. He never was. He's just loud. And the people beating him are quiet. And in this media environment, loud beats quiet almost every single time. Almost. So the next time somebody tells you the courts are in his pocket and the game is rigged and there's no point in trying, you ask them a simple question. You ask them how a guy who wins everything ends up 7-62. You ask them how a guy who wins everything gets stopped by judges more than 200 times. And then you watch them change the subject, because they will every time. The numbers don't lie. The record is clear. And the belief that resistance is futile is the most dangerous lie of all, because it's the one that stops people from even trying. But the evidence is right there. People are trying and they're winning. Not every time, not permanently, but consistently, repeatedly documented in the official record of the United States court system. And that's the story you were never supposed to hear. Now, here's the thing that keeps me up at night. There's a very specific reason this administration might have decided that losing in court doesn't actually matter anymore. There's a reason they keep pushing policies their own lawyers know are going to get struck down. And when you understand that reason, when you understand what they're actually building here, and what they're betting the courts will eventually let them keep, this whole thing stops looking like incompetence. It starts looking like a plan. The strategy is overwhelming the system until it breaks. The question is whether the system holds. The lower courts have been holding. The question is whether that holds all the way up. Because if it does, then all those losses mean something. If it doesn't, then the 15,000 is just the beginning. And that's the story we should all be watching. That's the story that actually matters. Not the noise, not the social media posts, not the rallies, the rulings, the record, the numbers. That's where the truth is.